So today we're going to kick off Women's History Month with celebrating women's history and connecting their past to our futures. Again, I'm Robyn Harvey. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for Be Strong Families.
I'm Jennifer Johnson. I am in a support role for the training department, the program department, Robyn and Alexandra.
So we are so excited to get started with these conversations. Andrew, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, so our first question, what have you learned and what do you need to learn about women in American and world history? I will go ahead and start. I'm really excited that we're doing this webinar and to be a part of this one because I feel like I have so much left to learn. And I really, when I look back in my formal education, I don't remember learning a lot about women's history until I was in college. And I went to an all women's college and one of our prerequisites for moving on past general education was a class about women's history. And I don't remember a giant amount from that class right now. So I feel like this is a really good opportunity to start thinking about lots of really issues in the current world that are affected by women's history. So I'm just looking forward to learning more from this conversation.
Me too. Because I had very similar experiences. I didn't take any women's history classes in college, and I certainly didn't take them in high school. Everything that I've ever learned has been, through the internet, or, I'll see a meme or a little posting that I'll do some, extra investigating into to see how cool it is. Jonathan Wolfe is saying, I've largely learned a lot about suffragists from 100 years ago and the 19th century, including Ida B. Wells. Thank you, Jonathan. And Kanisha, welcome. And I was going to say, I knew Carolyn was writing something. She says, I'm a woman of a certain age. And she has that in parentheses, which is real cute. And during my college years, there was very little offered. Since then, I've learned all of the great impacts women have made in the country and in the world. Carolyn, I'd love to explore that further. How did you learn? Where did you go? Where had the best information? Fatima. Hi, Fatima. Nice to see you here. You're going to want to put to everybody, Fatima, when you do your chatting, just so everybody can see it.
Yeah, and going back to what Carolyn said and Robyn, what you said about learning about how other people learn, that's one of the things that I love most about our cafes and this style of webinar. So I am also very interested because I feel like sometimes so overwhelmed I don't even know where to start. And coming out of Black History Month, coming into Women's History Month, and also us all being conscious of it's not just a month, it's all the time for all of these, and how important it is to kind of look back and lift those voices up that haven't always been really prominent because of not being part of kind of the dominant group. I'm really excited to learn more. So if anybody wants to share where they're learning more, that would be great.
So Jonathan added, so there are so much more material and publications than when I was in high school in the 60s. Yes. And Anna is offering, I've learned about some famous women from some posters I've seen in schools. Yeah, Anna, that's awesome. That's kind of like my method too. I'm not in schools, but I see them on the internet. And then I look, like last night I was researching and I shared an article with Jennifer about a Malawi queen who was her mission in life is to end child marriage and to end child sex abuse as a ritual in their country. So interesting, but that all spurred because I was scrolling and saw a little snapshot of it. And I thought, gosh, that's interesting. I wonder who she is and what she is about. And so then I found this article and I was excited. And then I shared it with Jennifer and I was like, this is, great information.
Yeah, and it was very interesting because it was all stemmed from her deep desire of getting those girls and the boys back into continuing education.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. And then Anna, if you want to either raise your hand or just type about what kind of posters you're seeing. Who are you seeing those on? Tarcisio's here. Hi, Tarcisio. And Tarcisio's offering, I've learned mostly from women around my life, mom, sisters, wife, daughter, colleagues, friends. And lately the articles and documentaries, sorry, of events happening in the last 5 years, the Me Too movement. Yeah. Thanks, Tarcisio. Anybody else? Where are you learning and what do you need to learn? Kimberly, I'm currently in school for my MSW and learned there is actually a feminist therapy that is, of course, specific to women and done in a way that promotes relational therapy and freedom for gender specific roles. That's super interesting, Kim. I'd love to hear more about that too. Great. Carolyn's offering talk to women who are alive and know what they know. Look for articles, old and new. Read all magazines owned and operated by women. I just purchased United States postal stamps that offered an African American woman I'd never heard of before. So now I'm researching this bad sister. Yeah, thank you. And Jonathan offering male clients could use a feminist oriented therapy as well. I'd love to hear more about that, Jonathan, as to what your perspective is on that and why. That's a really interesting little, veer. That's great.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of reflecting on like spaces for women or women sharing with other women and just in general, but also being inclusive in that as like women, defining women as people assigned women at birth, people who identify as a woman, trans women. So wanting that space to be all inclusive and not just looking at the history, like women's history, like what Jonathan said earlier, learning about the suffragettes. So I learned about that too. And that was probably most of the extent of my knowledge about women's history at the very beginning. But that's very like a lens of whiteness kind of, and just one group. So wanting that to be much more inclusive of other groups as well.
Thank you. And Kimberly is also typing. That is one of its purposes, to help educate men and women. Yeah, I love that. And, as a mom of 8 boys, I'm always saying feminism isn't just for me. It's something that you have to be, have a firm grasp on as well. Jonathan's saying we should all be pro women, pro people of color, pro oppressed folks, pro Catholics, pro Jewish, pro women. Yes. Very good. Very good. What are some, and Andrew's going to be raising his hand. So Andrew, you can come on screen and then I'll talk about my follow-up question.
Thanks, Robyn. I'll just stay with just the mic, okay, because I want to make sure, since everybody else does it, I respect that as well.
Awesome.
One thing that I found really fascinating was a book that I read about the history of places and the history of locations in finding out more about the history of women. This one was specific to the history of streets. Because what can happen is when you look at the political history of something, there is an erasure there because there's only certain groups that are allowed to operate within that those political spheres. But when it comes to talking about a street, there was conversations around who were on those streets. In this context, it was American streets, and it was who was upset that railroads were being cut through these streets, and you would see people die on these roads, and just see their children die And it was really fascinating to see this history kind of come alive by just taking a geographic location where people are dealing with real world issues around, like this case, railroads and their children being crushed by these railroads coming through their neighborhoods, and how there was social movement that data didn't necessarily collect. But this, by looking at the streets, you could start to see a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's all really interesting.
Very interesting.
And Tarcisio is offering, I need to learn more about what's so systemic / toxic in the world that works so well, so he can combat it. That keeps women sidelined and really being power / engine that makes changes needed for a better world. Tarcisio, do you want to speak on that a bit? Elaborate? If you do, go ahead and raise your hand and Andrew will, oh, there you go.
Sure. I'm not a woman. As much as I have you guys, or my wife, or sisters, it is, for the most part, difficult for me to kind of pinpoint something in my being a male, a guy. Man, you know, because I contribute to this force that prevents women from being. And sometimes I don't know how I do it, but I'm part of the systemic force that prevents women from being at the real gem that I see in them, but it doesn't happen. I don't know if this does make sense for many. And about 20 years ago, we had this conversation in a different group in among Catholics, and one guy said to these women that we were sitting with, said, you know, I'm not a woman, that's your fight. And kind of agree with him, but I said no, because these are people next to me, and if they are okay, I'm gonna be okay, right? So I don't know. I contribute knowingly and unknowingly to these sideline women, but I don't know how unconsciously contribute. I would like to know from my friends, from, I don't know, someone has a book, a documentary, I'm saying, hey, Tarcisio, this is how you need to apply yourself in doing something.
Thanks, Tarcisio.
Yeah,
And
thank you. Go ahead, Robyn.
Well, you go ahead, and then I'll.
Jonathan says the fight for justice and equality, everyone fight, as in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like history is important, and just current allyship strategies or unlearning. Those are, I feel like there's a lot of talk about things, and I also feel, including for you know, being a woman, and including for women's equality, there are things I don't know either. So it's not unique to being a man or not being a woman. Those techniques and learning how to take action, I think that's something I'm trying to learn as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say, piggybacking off Jonathan and his it's an everyone fight, I have found myself having to do a great deal of unlearning of the conditioning that I was raised in, that women are quiet and submissive, and we don't get to speak our whole truth, and that life was a complete competition. And because this person is doing great, that does, you know, it diminishes me. I've had to do a lot of soul searching and bringing a lot of awareness to my own life and figuring out where the conditioning came from, what it actually is, and how to, you know, go backwards. And so while I'm, you know, still studying individual women and their contributions to society and all of that, at this point in my evolution, I'm doing a lot more unlearning than that, like, niche learning. Because yes, I'm so grateful for people who have done, you know, medical marvels and inventions and wrote books and done all of those things. But if I can't internalize those because of my conditioning, it's like going over my head.
Totally.
So it's about every group supporting other strugglers and causes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, which is another great point, because I can't stop thinking about how you can't talk about women's equality without talking about all other groups, because of all the, you know, intersectionality and how each individual has their own, is like kind of, you know, on the privilege scale somewhere, and we have to recognize that. And you can't talk about women's rights without talking about others' rights who are oppressed.
Right. And in a couple of weeks, maybe even next week, Andrew can correct me, we have a intersectionality and women's history. And that will be another great place to discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Andrew, do you want
Next
to go to
question.
the next? Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
you said
that's
that
March
was-
28th. Yeah, that'll be a good conversation.
Yeah. And then we can go to the next question. And the next question is what? Let's see.
We've got, what books and movies have positive messages about empowering women and healthy relationships between people of different genders?
I love this because I love books. So I would have to think like there's some old time favorites that fall in this one for me, like Steel Magnolias, Aaron Brockovich, Thelma and Louise. You know, those are kind of tongue in cheek, but bring the message too. So you're being entertained. Little Women from Molly Jordan. Yes, definitely.
One book that really sticks out in my mind is called I Am Malala.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
I have not read that one yet.
It's powerful.
I mean, just her whole story is powerful. So I can
Yeah.
imagine.
So Malala is a Pakistani woman. It's been a long time since I've read this book, but she is and was an advocate for women's education, and she continued to go to school, and her family and her father were huge supporters of women being able to get an education. But when the Taliban kind of took over, they were not okay with that. She went to school anyway. She was shot and survived. And I've seen her speak a few times on TV, not in person, but she's just one of those, like, I feel her energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And Jonathan offered, some of us who were lucky to grow up in the 60s have less to unlearn. Yes, definitely. Because causes were all around us: Black power, farm workers, second stage feminism, the peace movement, the civil rights, the Soviets, the Jews, gay rights, disabilities. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I grew up in the 80s. So that's a completely different generation with a lot to unlearn in my experience. And then Tarcisio offered an animated movie, Mulan.
Yeah, I love that, like, more recently, there's a lot of women of color with awesome personalities and great power in our children's movies.
I was going to say the recent Disney movie of Encanto.
Oh yeah, my favorite by far.
That was a great.
Carolyn says Sally Field won an Oscar for a woman who took on a factory organization to form a union.
Yeah, Emma. That's right, Carolyn. And Katie's offering, there's a documentary on Netflix called Heroine, and it focuses on 3 women in a community aiding those who struggle with substance abuse. I love, Katie, that you brought it back down to the local level too, because there's awesome women who are doing really important things all around us every day. Yep, Gresham said Encanto. Oh, Jonathan said the Sally Field film was fiction. Oh, wow. And then Jade Aldridge, Quit Like a Woman, Holly Whitaker. I'd never heard about that one, Jade. What's that one about? Others? Who else has a movie or a book that has positive messages about empowering women and healthy relationships between people of different genders? Okay, Molly Jordan said Girl Fight. All right, that's another one I haven't heard of. And Jade, Finding Our Voices and Healing Addiction. Is that a book, or is that what these movies can do? And then Katie Andrews,
Yes.
yes. Oh, good. Thank you for putting the IMDb page up. That's great. Hidden Figures, Jasmine, yes. I've heard really great things about that one. And Tarcisio, A League of Their Own, a baseball team. Yes, that is. Rosie O'Donnell and Madonna.
That was a good one.
Yeah. Salt of
Andrews.
the Earth, 1954. Mexican workers at a zinc mine call a general strike. It's only through the solidarity of the workers and importantly, the indomitable resolve of their wives, mothers, and daughters that they eventually triumph. Thank you, Andrew. It's a great list for some books and some movies to read, everyone. Anyone else have any?
I just finished reading a book called Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness, who maybe some people know as one of the experts on Queer Eye. And he or she or they, he goes by all of them, is a non-binary individual. And I just loved hearing his story. And also it helped me reflect on just femininity and masculinity, and that kind of how that plays out in society and how people are expected to be and how people are treated if they don't fit into other people's expectations. And I think that plays into a lot of women's history and women's equality as well, because you're expected to be a certain way. But it was a book that helped me reflect on a lot of things.
Yeah, throw that in the chat, Jennifer, so everyone can get the name of it. And Tarcisio's Offering the Bible is full of stories of great women. Yes, I agree. And Gresham's Offering, I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter book by Erica Sanchez. Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness. Thank you. Yeah, those are all really great. Has anyone read anything with Glennon Doyle in her book Untamed? And that was about a woman who was silenced all of her life and finally uses her voice. It's really a powerful book. Untamed is awesome. Yes, I love it. And Molly, do you listen to the Untamed podcast? I love that one too.
I started listening to that on Robyn's recommendation. That book is very high up on my list.
Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah.
I just started reading my new book that I've only read a couple of pages, is an abolitionist handbook by Patrice. I don't know how to pronounce her last name correctly. Colors.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm butchering that. And I just cannot wait to hear more about her experiences. And she just seems like such a powerful woman who has just come through a lot. So I'm looking forward to learning from that book.
Yeah, put that one in the chat too, Jen. And then Bill
Andrew did it for me. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay. Things I learned about women from different life experiences, reading, socializing, and working. Women are great and powerful. Women give birth to men and raise them. Women are mothers, sisters, daughters, and wives of men. I learned it's important to hold the great value and demand respect for this greatness. There's nothing wrong with respecting men also for their different values. I've learned it's important to have mutual respect to the different greatness God has given us. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was one thing I remember being younger and just, really fighting for equality in ideas, but not recognizing that we are different and that's okay. And it was always like, I can do anything, you can do better. But it just, it's not like that either for me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the book A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, highlighting principles that increase self-love. I think that's super important for all of us, Jade.
Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur might be controversial, but I find it empowering. Thank you,
All right.
Portia.
Hope you guys are taking note of some of these.
Yeah, this is like my new book list.
Right. Yeah.
And I love reading controversial books because just because you read a book doesn't mean you agree with everything in it, or you should. But reading different perspectives is important, I think.
Yeah. Little Jessica video.
Oh, yes.
I can do anything. Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right, anybody else got a book recommendation or some kind of lesson that you took away from one of these movies, these books? All right, Andrew,
Thank
you can go
you.
ahead and go to that third question. All
How
right.
do you deal with ignorant questions or statements? This is a great question. I think somebody said earlier about, I think Tarcisio, you said that somebody you were having a conversation with said like, well, that's not my battle. And I know personally I'm on a journey to be able to continue a conversation instead of reacting or right away thinking like I can't have a conversation with someone who thinks that way. Tarcisio has his hand raised, so come on in, Tarcisio.
I mean, there are two people here doing this presentation that really, you just took it out, out of my mouth, Jennifer. I expect and hope women can be patient with me for my ignorance. It's not something that I want, but then again, Robyn mentioned that, it is something I learned, and it's so permeated in me from where I come from and growing in a world that I didn't know any different. So being patient with me, that would be great. So I try to be the same, right? With ignorant questions or statements, it's like, okay, once or not long ago, I was like that. And some people have been patient enough with me and dedicated just to kind of teach me or guide me. That's sometimes is the thank you, the honest answer that I would expect from my co-workers, colleagues, and friends, and people that know me. So that's my same attitude nowadays as well.
Thanks, Tarcisio.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that one thing I'd like to say with this question, for me, it's really about reminding myself in the moment what ignorance is. And ignorance doesn't have to be malicious or rude or condescending. It could be just a lack of knowledge and they might not know. And I think for me, like taking a step back and giving the person the most generous assumption that I can, which would be ignorance and not maliciousness, is important. That's important for me because then I can have a rational conversation. This person's not trying to hurt me. They're not trying to hurt people. They just don't know yet. There was a time when I didn't know. There was a time where I thought I knew, but didn't know. So just giving people that assumption. Jade offered, I try and stay neutral and clarify their intention behind the statement. Oftentimes people need more love, patience, understanding, and perhaps education when they're coming from ignorance. There might be a chance they can learn if I can withhold judgment and extend wisdom and love. Yes, thank you, Jade.
And Katie says, it's so easy to want to respond in a passive aggressive way. However, I have found that responding in a calm way and asking to provide some education or experience helps create a much more productive conversation. Yes, thank you.
Katie. And then Andrew, go ahead and let LaJuan into the room. Thank you, LaJuan.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. I just found out when someone makes a statement, because sometimes it could be on the receiving end that we're not understanding what the person is trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. So sometimes just having that patience and just asking questions that's irrelevant to the statement, and then we try to come to a medium with the person instead of passing judgment right out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like leaving some space and not jumping to conclusions is really helpful for all communication.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Carolyn, I see you wrote your name again, so I'm hoping you're going to have a comment. Jade says, also allowing others to have differing opinions has been helpful. Yes, for me too, Jade. Realizing that we're all different and not everyone will agree or see through eyes of an informed perspective, and that's okay. And Jade, for me, I had to take it a step further. See through eyes of an informed perspective. I had to question myself. Is my perspective right? Because I've had to do so much on learning am I actually the one that's off kilter here? And so, yeah, and it is okay. It's okay to question ourselves as well. And then Roy and Amanda, I save my energy and learn to pick which battles need to be fought. I remain calm and address it if they want to learn. If they don't want to learn, I move on and save energy. Yes. Yeah, that sounds very wise.
And Carolyn says, take the moment to process the questions or statements. Always seize the opportunity to have the conversation. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
Seize the opportunity to have the conversation. Yes.
Yeah. I also think, Jen, that it's really important to sometimes have a pause. You know, I'm not sure that I can respond to this question right this second, but let me give it some thought. You know, let my emotions kind of diffuse, go down, take that, you know, that breath, kind of like that, you know, Snickers commercial, eat a Snickers. So you're chewing and you can't talk.
Yeah, and also be okay when other people need that time as well.
Mhm.
And that's something I can struggle with sometimes. I want to talk about it now, and maybe it's not the time, or another person's not in that space. So yeah, just having that pause is very important.
Right. Anybody else? Andrew, you want to put the question back up or back into the chat so we can look at it a little? Thanks. So does anybody differentiate between ignorant questions and ignorant statements? For me, like, I say a lot of ignorant questions. I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes like somebody might not think that they're good questions, but I have a harder time with statements, because statements to me are like more factual, I guess, or more black and white, like your mind's already made up. So does anybody have a harder time talking or, you know, dealing with the statements than the questions? Great point, Robyn. Is an ignorant question, or is it a trigger for the proponent? Why am I reacting or responding this way? I think that that's a good question to lean into, Tarcisio. Yes, asking ourselves, why are we responding with this emotion? And I can say that as a straight, white, middle-class woman. I think that sometimes our friends of color, Indigenous people, or our gay friends, our transgender friends, they may have to answer more questions. Like I have a really good friend who is Black, and I ask her a lot of questions, and sometimes she says, I can't do this today. I've already answered 50 questions from white people, and I need to, you know, take a break. And I can say, okay, that's cool. You know, that's something. I have to take that into account, like where I and everybody is at. Does that make sense?
Yes, I feel that. And I like to try to ask, I like to say, if you don't feel like answering this, or you know, or think if I should go learn this elsewhere, please just tell me, and I apologize in advance. Kind of recognizing that we will have ignorant questions, and I do like to think about the differentiation between the ignorant question and the ignorant statement. Andrew says, I sometimes feel like questions can show a lack of awareness or knowledge, not all the time, but a lot of the time. An ignorant statement often feels like the person saying it has already made up their mind. Yes, and that can be difficult. Katie says, statements sometimes feel more definite or absolute, often hurting more or triggering a bigger response. Yeah, I am reflecting on somebody very close to me who I was having a conversation with recently, and we're constantly learning, and I feel very lucky to be a part of the Be Strong Families team, where we really put an emphasis on learning, and our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative is very strong. And so I'm constantly learning, and I like to share that with people close to me. And so, but it's not always well received by the people close to me. And I have to sometimes take a breath and say they're not in the place, or maybe I didn't bring it up right, or, you know, maybe we were already having a heated argument and I was like, oh, don't say it like that. You know, like being more politically correct or using a term that's new to me. And I want to share it immediately, but I don't always do it in the best way. So that's hard sometimes when the statement, because there's no question, there's no room for a question. It's already a statement that to me feels ignorant when I literally just learned about something the day before.
Yeah, those are really good, you know, questions to ask ourselves for sure. Is it the right time? Is it the right tone? You know, was I doing it in a spirit of learning or a spirit of condemnation? Was I trying to get a little jab in? Yeah. Roy and Amanda, yes, I have a hard time with statements because it feels like it's their truth. But that's not the way it is for all people. Yes, being a Black woman, it gets tiring answering questions, but it's not their truth. Yes, thank you. And then I get ignorant questions like asking me, why do I cover my body when it's hot? Like, don't you feel hot? Or even telling me, it's okay, you're in America. You don't have to cover like this, or you don't have to cover your beauty. Honestly, when it feels disrespectful, I just ignore it. But when people ask me respectfully that they want to learn why I cover, I gladly explain respectfully. Thank you. I have no problem with the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, questions usually it's with a spirit of wanting to learn more, and you know, people don't have to put a foot in their mouth. It's just about learning.
Yeah, I like that.
And just going back to the Bilquis, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Feel free to raise your hand and correct me. That reminds me of when I lived in Spain for a few years, and I remember during that time in France, they were outlawing the burqa. And I remember at that time being like on the fence about my opinion, like, well, you know, women should feel free to cover, but I wasn't taking into account at all what those women actually wanted. And I have a very different perspective on that now. And and it's another kind of example of why are people not of that group making decisions for people of that group. And of course it's much more complex than that, but you see that a lot, and you see it now with you know, bans or you know, legislation and women's bodies going on a lot. And it's just the decision making needs to be much more inclusive in general, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So does anybody have any tips or go-to statements that they utilize when you get an ignorant question or an ignorant statement? I like to call them like my canned answers. And depending on the person's station in my life, like what the relationship is, there's varied ones. Like if you say a statement to me, like let's say my father-in-law said a statement to me, I have a close enough relationship with him that I can say something like, well, what makes you think that? And try to get the conversation to blossom. And so I can share my perspective instead of being like defensive about it, you know, leaning in and asking questions and coming at that ignorant statement in a spirit of learning. Like, what makes you tick? I want to know. If it's someone at the grocery store, sometimes I just give them a look like, not today, person. But it just depends, like, you know, where they're at in my life and what influence I have on them and what influence they have on me. Anybody else? Any statements? Portia, I think when people are ignorant and have their set views and make statements in a negative way, there's still an opportunity for a teaching moment. Yes, true, not everyone will be receptive. Just try and not take it personally or react emotionally. Easier said than done, but we can still educate them if we have the tolerance and patience. Wise words, Portia. Andrew, I don't necessarily have a go-to statement that I say to them, but I'll try to approach the conversation knowing I won't be changing their mind in one conversation. What I can do is plant a seed of doubt in their certainty of their statement and work on the doubt in the context of what our relationship is. Yes, thank you, Andrew. And then Katie. Katie says, I normally ask if I could share when responding. Instead of being combative or talking over someone or forcing what I know or my experience. If they don't want to listen, just keep on moving. And Kimberly, I agree that questions are better. However, some of them can be used as a way to be purposefully offensive. Yeah. My daughter shared with someone during a conversation that African American women do not have to wash their hair every day. And the question came back, well, do you think you need to shower every day? My daughter blew it off, but was angry. Thanks for sharing that, Kim. Burley, sorry. I keep shortening your name, not on purpose. And Tarcisio. Sometimes I use, can you say more about that? I'd like to learn more about where you're coming from. Good. And Jade, can I ask, can you give me some examples of how that's true for you? Jade, great question. Or that's an interesting perspective. How did you arrive at that? Very good ones.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, I know. Me too. These are all really great. Thanks so much for sharing. Anybody else? Go-to statements? Okay. All right, Andrew, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So today, Be Strong Families is amplifying, #amplify connect the past. So I want you to think about a word that you'd like to amplify coming off of this webinar. And I'm going to put my word in. Let's see. My word again is going to be, which it often is, amplify openness. I don't think without openness that I can learn anything. And Andrew, amplify knowledge, gaps in knowledge. Thank you, Andrew. And Jennifer, amplify, keep on learning. Good. Tiffany, amplify curiosity, amplify self-awareness. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Jade. There is an ending poll up on the screen. If you would answer these 2 quick questions, that would be awesome. And then I just want to draw our attention back again to the amplify, the AMPU, which is our More Perfect Union Parent Cafe in a Box cards. These questions are where parenting and social justice meet the intersection. These talk about parenting, in context of the outside world. We talk about prejudice and racism and bias and bullying. And we talk about different cultures and communication styles, all within the framework of the Strengthening Families protective factors.
And Carolyn says,
yep, go ahead.
Amplify, let's talk about it.
Yeah, and that is a perfect amplify statement for this slide, because these cards do allow us to have these conversations that will bring us together, help us unlearn the things we need to unlearn and learn new ways that bring us closer together. Thank you, Fatima. If you are interested in a Café team training, we bring groups together once or twice a month to learn how to provide your organization's parents cafes. If you're interested, you can use your phone and capture the QR code there, or Andrew has the link in the chat. Roy and Amanda, Amplify Energy, thank you. Amplify Families from Anna. And then Jennifer, you want to talk about these?
Yes, so our upcoming webinars tomorrow, we have, so Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have webinars in Spanish. Tomorrow is Celebrando la Libertad de Ser Mujer. Wednesday, we have Justice for All, a family and community-driven movement to promote justice and unity. And Thursday, we have Autoestima, Valoración de mí misma.
And Jennifer, for those of us who are monolingual English, what is the webinar on Tuesday and Thursday about?
Tuesday, celebrating the liberty of being a woman. I may be sometimes translating this to word for word. So
Mhm.
that's the idea. Thursday is autoestima, self-confidence, self-confidence, valoración, how I feel about myself, or feeling good about myself.
Awesome. So if you have any friends or colleagues who are monolingual Spanish speakers or even bilingual and just are interested in those topics, please encourage them to join up. And then on Friday, I think is the next, okay, let's go here first. The YouTube subscription, all of our webinars, both English and Spanish, are held on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to us. You'll get notifications about when there's new Be Strong Families content added, and you can easily and quickly share it from your cell phone or your laptop anywhere around the world to anybody that you know. And then the last slide.
That is the last slide, because between 12 o'clock and now, I found out that the slide I created for the Taste of Cafes was for the wrong one. So I'm going to post this in the chat, but
Okay.
please join us on Friday for a Taste of Vitality Cafe.
Awesome.
And it will be a Vitality Cafe that is focused on kind of Women's History Month as well, or just that kind of topic.
That's great. So our Taste of
Thank you.
Cafes happen every Friday from noon until 1 o'clock, or noon until 1:30, Andrew?
Yep, noon to 1:30.
Noon until 1:30. Come and join in the conversation. This conversation today gave you a snapshot of some of the questions that could come up in a cafe, but our Taste of Cafes follow the whole model and you get a full experience. If you have not joined on one, I hope that you do. I'd like to thank you today for joining Jennifer and I and Andrew and everyone else at Be
Thank you
Strong
for
Families.
sharing.
Have a great day, everyone. Happy Women's History Month. If you want to challenge yourself, go pick up one of those books.